Let's talk about the Big Two and the Little 12, soon to be the Little 14 when USC and UCLA join. Michigan and Ohio State have been on top of the Big Ten, and it hasn't been close over the past 2 seasons. Before then, for almost the entirety of the 21st century, Ohio State was the Big One, and the rest of the conference was either the Little 13, the Little 11, or the Little 10, depending on the state of the conference and what eras of conference expansion you were looking at, so on and so forth. I am of the opinion that Ohio State hasn't gotten worse over the past 2 seasons. In fact, I think Ryan Day's 2022 squad was the second best of his tenure at Ohio State. It was better than many of the Urban Meyer squads fielded at Ohio State, in fact. The 2021 squad I do think was his worst, but 2020, 2019, and 2022 all were elite teams, in my opinion. And maybe some would like to argue that even 2021 was an elite team for Ryan Day. What didn't change was Ohio State. What did change was Michigan. Michigan's 2021 and 2022 squads are the best squads in the school's history in the 21st century. Michigan got tougher. Michigan got better. Michigan dipped their hands in the transfer portal. Michigan got much better developmentally. They hired new coaches, a youthful staff. Jim Harbaugh reinvented himself after a disaster 2020 campaign. And Ohio State, to a certain degree, has reinvented themselves. Ryan Day, I think, took on a new identity after the 2021 season. Ohio State tried to run it without a ton of success in 2022, mainly due to injuries and just the fact that Ohio State's much more built to be a passing team. But Ryan Day's made adaptations, and Ryan Day's team, while similar to Urban Meyer's in many aspects, also is unique in others. More focus on the pass game, a level of development at the wide receiver position that Urban could have only dreamed of. I know you might be thinking Michael Thomas, but that pales in comparison to Chris Olave, Garrett Wilson, Jackson Smith-Njigba, and Marvin Harrison Jr. It pales in comparison. The wide receiver development and the level of quarterback play and quarterback development under Ryan Day, phenomenal. Things that, in my opinion, Urban only could have dreamed of. Now, the way that Urban put together the run game and put together his defenses, that's something that Ryan Day can learn from. Jim Harbaugh, on the other hand, has went a little back in time and brought back a power run attack that is extremely hard to stop. Extremely hard to stop. Michigan does not like to pass the football. They do not even take chances to pass the ball unless they have to. They really don't. They would rather be conservative. They would rather average 3 or 4 yards per carry and painfully eat up clock and not score so many points and have a very boring game plan and win than be flashy, pass a whole lot, and do things that Ryan Day's offense does. The identity of these two teams on paper, and to a certain degree when you look beyond the surface, is different. But you know what these teams have? They have a lot in common. There's a reason that they are the Big Two, and everyone else is the Little 12. Again, soon to be the Little 14. There is a reason that this coming season, the conference will once again come down to these two teams. And Penn State, Wisconsin, Iowa, Michigan State, any other team that is possibly mentioned as a challenger will fold when they face these teams. They will be cast into the fire when Ryan Day or Jim Harbaugh put down their headset and glare them in the eye. There are characteristics and qualities about these two teams that, while I'm not going to say they'll win the national title every year, they have Georgia and Alabama to face in the SEC, But they are on top of the world, and they are the best teams in the nation when you look just solely at the Big Ten. The level that Ohio State and Michigan are on is unmatched from the rest of the conference. Take in some ESPN analytics, for example. Michigan and Ohio State last year were both top 4 in ESPN's FPI. Ohio State was 3rd both years, and Michigan was 4th. Alabama was 2nd in both years, and Georgia was 1st. The top 4 of ESPN's FPI was the same in 2021 and in 2022. Ohio State occupied the number 2 spot of ESPN's FPI for much of the 2022 season. In fact, when you look at average game control, average in-game win probability over 2021 and 2022, Michigan, Ohio State, Alabama, and Georgia are once again in the top 4 in that same exact order. Georgia averages 1. They were first in the nation in game control and average win game probability for both of the past 2 seasons. Alabama was anywhere from 2 to 4 in those categories over the past 2 seasons. Ohio State was anywhere from 2 to 8. Michigan was anywhere from 3 to 7. Penn State slotted in at 5 when you average the game control and average in-game win probability ranks over the past 2 seasons. But just because they're 5th and Michigan is 4th doesn't mean they're close. In fact, while Michigan averages around a 4 ranking in all those categories, Penn State averages 14. Big drop off from that 4th to 5th spot. Michigan is just, look, Michigan has more potential, more talent. They control games a heck of a lot better than Penn State does. Same with Ohio State, Alabama, Georgia. And back when it was Alabama, Clemson, Oklahoma, Ohio State, those 4 teams typically would do the same. College football really has a hierarchy on average of top 4 or 3 teams in the nation. Occasionally, it expands to maybe the top 6, maybe top 8. In some years where it's really deep, maybe it is a top 10. There's an argument that 2021, it might have just been a top 2, where it was really just Alabama and Georgia competing for that elite tier. When you look at performance and efficiency, averaging rankings in points per game offensively and defensively, and efficiency metrics offensively and defensively, Michigan and Ohio State are once again in the top 4. Michigan is 3rd when you average those numbers out. Ohio State is 4th. Ohio State was number 2 in offensive points per game, 1st in offensive efficiency. Their kryptonite was defense, 25th in defensive points per game, 21st in defensive efficiency. Michigan was 7th in both defensive points per game and efficiency. They were 6th for offensive points per game, 12th for offensive efficiency. Penn State, again, in that same equation, those same metrics, was 5th, but they were still behind Michigan and Ohio State. These 2 teams, schematically, statistically, from any angle you look at it, they are ahead of the rest of the conference. If you were to average on-field talent and returning production, Ohio State and Michigan would be in the top 2. Both have more returning production than Penn State does. Both are also using the transfer portal more than Penn State is. And I compare to Penn State a lot because Penn State is really the only other team outside of maybe Wisconsin with Luke Fickell, who I think could make an excellent year 1 run to potentially a Big Ten title and college football playoff spot, though that is very unlikely. But just because of how much I like Luke Fickell and the underrated collection of players and talent there, I think some lightning in the bottle things could happen. Penn State is really the only team that could come close to entering the top of the mountain conversation with these 2. And Ohio State and Michigan have consistently placed ahead of them in every way, shape, and form. So I've come up with a few reasons as to why these 2 are going to stay at the top and why I think they might even separate themselves even further from the rest of the conference in 2023. It really is Michigan and Ohio State versus the rest of the Big Ten. These teams, by far, out of the Big Ten, are the teams that have the best odds, the best chance to reach the college football playoff and to win the college football playoff. These teams have the deepest rosters in the entire Big Ten at nearly every position you can think of. For Michigan, this is mainly because they're elite at developing. They have one of the best strength and conditioning coaches in the country in Ben Herbert, and they're top 5 in returning production. So they brought in new recruits. They're bringing in transfer portal guys, good ones, and some of the players who just can't play high-level D1 football, they're leaving. They're transferring away to areas where hopefully they can get more playing time and continue on their developmental journey. Michigan's roster's building itself up. They're reloading. They don't have many departures. They have a lot of cohesivity to them. Ohio State is in this position not because of returning production, but because they're using the transfer portal where they have holes, the secondary, and because consistently, over the past decade, they've out-recruited everyone in the Big Ten by a long shot. But without further ado, let's get into these reasons, and the first one is quarterback. Michigan and Ohio State have the Big Ten's best 2 quarterbacks by passer rating and by QBR. Kyle McCord, who I think, I'm 100% sure, 99.9 repeat end percent sure, that McCord is going to be starting for the Buckeyes. McCord had a 164.6 passer rating in 2021. He had a 176.3 passer rating in 2022. And he had a 77.6 QBR in 2022 again. J.J. McCarthy had a 79.1 QBR in 2022. He had a 155 passer rating in 2022 and a 152.3 passer rating in 2021. J.J. McCarthy does have mobility. He has over 400 career rushing yards and 7 career rushing touchdowns, averaging about 4.5 yards per carry on the ground. Kyle McCord isn't as mobile. He doesn't showcase his legs as much. From a QBR perspective, though, they're both similar, and what that tells me, along with passer rating, is that McCord is probably the better passer. McCord weighs 20 pounds more of a pro-style quarterback that has a cannon of an arm. J.J. McCarthy has arm strength, is incredible, is accurate, also has more playing time and more experience than McCord does. But these 2 quarterbacks, I was getting a little bit into a comparison trap between the 2 of them, which is going to be hard. It'll get much easier when they're both playing on the same day, and eventually when they play against each other in the game, which I'm very pumped up for. These are the 2 best quarterbacks in the conference, in my opinion. And for those of you who might say, well, what about Talia Tagovailoa? What about Tanner Mordecai? What about Casey Thompson? What about especially Drew Aller? I have a few things for you. Kyle McCord and J.J. McCarthy, when you combine talent, like from a recruiting perspective, when you combine what we've seen on the field, when you combine starting experience, when you combine the reputation of the men, whether those are assistant coaches or the head coaches or the coordinators who are developing them, they are at that tier. Drew Aller, he's breaking into year 2. And from a passer rating and QBR perspective, he did not look that fantastic this past season. Tanner Mordecai might be the closest to it, but Tanner Mordecai played at Oklahoma, then SMU. With the system that he's in at Wisconsin with Phil Longo, there is a chance that he could be in that category. But quarterback, I think it's for certain that these 2 have top 2 potential for the top 2 spots of the Big Ten quarterback position. And I think that they will be the top 2 quarterbacks in the Big Ten. Now, whether you pick J.J. McCarthy or Kyle McCord, there's a good debate for that. That will be for another video. Both teams return all of their starting guards, and they have elite O-line development. For me, this is the biggest one. I mentioned earlier how when you look on a surface level, and even when you look skin deep and organ deep and vein and artery deep into these two programs, there are a lot of differences. This is one similarity. They have great O-line play. Oluwatimi, Luke Whippler, some of the best centers in the country. Their tackle play, their guard play, some of the better in the country. Their trench play, overall, is good. They know how to develop in the trenches, both from a reputation standpoint and from watching them over the past 2 or 3 seasons, or just making sure that we're, levying reputation and present standards and level of execution equally. These two teams know how it works at the line of scrimmage. And for all the faults that Ohio State's defense had, a lot of that was more on it being year one in Jim Knowles' scheme and a secondary that dealt with injuries and dealt with abhorrently abnormal regression. But anyway, these two, especially on the offensive line, know how to develop. And both of their starting guards are phenomenal. Zach Zinner and Trevor Keegan, I think, is the best guard duo in the country. Now, PFF has both Donovan Jackson and Matthew Jones in the top 50 of guards when you look at rankings from the 2022 season. PFF might think that's the best guard duo in the nation for the 2023 season. You have two potentially All-American caliber guards for each of these offensive lines. Drake Nugent is an All-American caliber center. Jacob James, while it's going to be his first year starting, I have absolute confidence. In the same way that I have confidence in Sharon Moore, I have confidence in Justin Fry to develop him into a great offensive lineman. At tackle is where Ohio State has questions, but just look at 2022. They had 2 NFL-level first-round offensive tackles, a part of that offensive line. And this year, Michigan might have that with Ladarius Henderson and Trente Jones, who are currently the projected 2 starting tackles. These teams, let me make a prediction here. When they face any other Big Ten team, especially Penn State, and that's because, again, Penn State's the closest to these two teams, those teams, when Ohio State and Michigan decide they want to run power football, if OSU's running back room can stay healthy, the opposing teams will fold. No D-line will have the capability to push these offensive lines around, except for when these two face each other. It will not happen. If you're Penn State, if you're Nebraska, if you're Minnesota, if you're Michigan State, and you blitz Michigan, you try any scheme against Michigan, the hole that Michigan's O-line will produce will be like parting the Red Sea, and you will see either Donovan Edwards or Blake Corum take it for chunks and chunks after yard until your defense breaks. And Ohio State hasn't seen this in a while, but I think you'll see it this year if Henderson and Williams can stay healthy. When Donovan Jackson and DeJuan Jones, they themselves will be parting the Red Sea against many of these defenses, and you will see Mayan Williams, Travion Henderson, or maybe if one of them's constantly injured again, Dallin Hayden, take it for chunk after chunk after chunk. And it's because what they can do at the offensive line in terms of recruiting and development. Ohio State recruits 4- and 5-star offensive linemen, and after Greg Stradwara was fired, they brought in Justin Fry, who's better at developing those prospects, and they're still recruiting well at the position. Michigan recently has been recruiting better and better at the lines of scrimmage, especially offensive line, and Sharon Moore is one of the best O-line coaches in the country. One thing I'm just going to quickly mention, and it's because there's not many stats and info to back this up necessarily, the Wolverines and the Buckeyes have top-notch strength and conditioning programs. I think Ohio State's, after last year and the amount of injuries that they had, needs to do a little bit of self-evaluation on this, but Ben Herbert and Mickey Mariotti are top 5 when it comes to the salaries nationwide of college football strength and conditioning coaches. They know what they're doing. They've been in the business for several years, and the way they develop players to play at an NFL level and to just dominate opposing teams. Keep in mind, Ryan Day, only team he's lost to in Big Ten play is Michigan, and those two Michigan teams went on to the college football playoff. This past season's Michigan team might have won a playoff game, maybe in 1 out of 50 or 1 out of 100 simulations they might win the national title. It's pretty impressive what Ohio State and Michigan have done for strength and conditioning and for building up their teams. Another factor is Ryan Day and Jim Harbaugh are except for maybe again Wisconsin, and Wisconsin's strange because it's first year. They have some things to do. I'm telling you, I'm just going to mention this for a few seconds, Wisconsin's boom or bust potential is limitless because what they've done in the portal and because they have one of the best I don't even know what that was, but one of the best head coaches in the business in Luke Fickell, and because they have great coordinators in Phil Longo or Mike Tressel coming, they have a whole lot of potential. But Ryan Day and Jim Harbaugh are the top 2 Big Ten head coaches if you take more into account the toughness that is required to play in the Big Ten Conference. Luke Fickell has played and coached. He's played in the Big Ten. He's even coached in the Big Ten. He's only coached for a consistent amount of time and only coached with success in the American. And now he's coming over to the Big Ten. Jim Harbaugh is 51-17 in Big Ten play. And Jim Harbaugh is also 17-1 in Big Ten play over the past 2 seasons. Ryan Day is 31-2 in Big Ten play, and he is 16-2 over the past 2 seasons. They have the most impressive resumes by a long shot out of any Big Ten head coach. Ryan Day has appeared in the college football playoff 3 times. He has a 1-3 record there. His lone win in the college football playoff coming in the Sugar Bowl in the 2020 season. Michigan and Jim Harbaugh, they've been to the college football playoff 2 times. 0-2 there. They've won 2 Big Ten championships. Ryan Day's also won 2 Big Ten championships. Impressive resumes. And both teams have a unicorn, or maybe a set of unicorns on their roster. If you want to win big, got to have a unicorn. A team that I could draw a comparison to this that isn't Wisconsin. I don't think Wisconsin is unicorns at any position. Wisconsin's main challenge to these two is their coaching staff. Penn State's is they have a unicorn player too in Nicholas Singleton, but I think that would be it. Maybe Olu Fashanu, but it's hard to determine unicorn players on the offensive line, especially. That's one of the hardest positions to grade, unless you're Tyler Linderbaum or maybe an Alabama or Georgia offensive lineman, or maybe John Michael Schmitz or Alu Oluwatimi, and you're just graded that highly across the board, then maybe you could be considered a unicorn. But looking at skill positions, Michigan might have multiple unicorns in their running back room. I think Donovan Edwards is the one that's definitely a unicorn. Maybe Blake Corum, after another year of development, could be that player. And I think on the defensive end, I think that Ernst Hausmann could be a unicorn for Michigan. Maybe Mike Sanderstil after another year of development at the noseback position. For Ohio State, I think they might have many at wide receiver. Marvin Harrison Jr. is a definite unicorn, even more so than Donovan Edwards. Emeka Egbuka could be another one. I've heard good things about I think it's Jalen Ballard, maybe Jaden Ballard, but I've heard good things about him, and sorry if I got the name wrong. I think JT Tuimoloau, I think that is a name to watch out for. He is certainly a unicorn on the defensive side of the ball. And Davison Igbinosun, too. Phenomenal season at Ole Miss as a freshman. We'll see how he develops with the Ohio State Buckeyes. But these two teams are at the top of the conference. And in my personal rankings, like my personal preseason top 25, which I'll be making a video on after all the spring games are concluded, in my potential power index, which I will also release shortly after the spring games have concluded, Ohio State and Michigan are not just in the top 4. They're not just well ahead of the rest of the Big Ten. They're the 2 best teams in the nation, in my opinion. Now, if you think that's ridiculous and you think Georgia or Alabama, maybe both are ahead of them, I have no qualms with that. Both of them have been, according to almost every metric, been the 2 top teams in the nation these past 2 seasons. They have been. They've also been the top 2 teams in the recruiting world for the past 5 years, in my opinion. Those 2 teams are phenomenal. But when you just look at the Big Ten, I find it very hard to believe this season that the crown is going to come to anyone but these 2. Now in 2024, when Michigan loses a boatload of its starters who run out of eligibility, and Ohio State, maybe Kyle McCord does declare after just 1 year starting, and maybe Ohio State kind of has a scare at the QB room, like Devin Brown's good, but who's his backup going to be? Maybe Penn State, who I think would return a lot in 2024, maybe then, or Wisconsin, or even USC joining the conference if they continue to recruit and they exceed expectations. But for now, not only is it the safe thing to assume, more importantly, it's the wise thing to do. I'm going out on a risk to a certain degree, saying that these 2 teams are the top 2 teams in the country, when none of them have won a playoff game over the past 2 seasons. But what they return, how they're recruiting, for Ohio State, there's a revenge arc behind it. For Michigan, they have this sense of being humiliated by TCU and then by Georgia after they throttled TCU. There are a lot of things, mainly stats and information, that point to these 2 teams being the cream of the crop in the Big Ten this coming season. Thank you all for watching. If you liked that video, I encourage you to hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, comment your thoughts down below, please, and thank you. I'll see you guys around. Bye-bye.